Continue.
And we're back. This is episode 402 of the Colombia Calling podcast. My very special guest this week is Johanna Gomez. She's currently in Cali, but her intermittent home right now is in London. She's an anthropologist from the Nacional in Bogota. She's got her MA from Goldsmiths University in London, and she's currently doing her PhD in Goldsmiths as well. And well, no, not sorry, Goldsmiths, UCL, so University College London. And it's a very special episode. Why is it a special episode? Because we're coming at it from left field a little bit. But before we get into that, let me welcome Johanna on the Colombia Calling podcast.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's a great pleasure. And we were put in touch by Lina Beatriz Pinto, who did an excellent episode on leishmaniasis and the Colombian conflict, which was very popular. And it seems so that people are responding to different kinds of episodes. And this episode is a little bit, well, I guess it's kind of personal and it's also academic and so on. But I want to know, and I'm just going to bring it out there, you're writing your PhD thesis at UCL about witchcraft in the llanos of Colombia. Tell us a little bit more. Correct me.
Well, it's precisely that. I think it's brujeria. Yeah. You know that brujeria translate as any of both sorcery of witchcraft. Mm-hmm. So it groups different sort of magical practices, not necessarily practices that cause harm to people or bring misfortune, but just like different kind of practices. And I studied this brujeria that was particularly used by paramilitaries in the Eastern Plains.
Wow.
Yes.
I mean, there is so much to talk about here. And I think we should start from the very beginning. How did you decide that this was going to be your doctoral thesis?
Well, to be honest, I was not particularly interested in brujeria at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess that, as a Colombian, you hear the story since you're very little. People talk about brujeria all the time, and you gather with your friends to tell these stories, and we'll talk for hours and hours about it. Mm-hmm. So I was curious, as any Colombian can be curious.
Yeah.
We culturally cultivate this curiosity for this topic, but as an intellectual endeavor, not particularly. So I came across with this topic because I was interested in studying paramilitarism from a cultural perspective. Mm-hmm. Not too much about, the political or the history of paramilitarism that was very well studied today, but to understand how they really change cultures, how they get to this place and then change the music, they change the food, they change even fashion, So I was interested since I live in the Guaviare region for a while, and I saw paramilitaries kind of taking over the local ways of dressing, and there are certain land, they position it norteña music in town, and all these very subtle things, this cultural capital of paramilitaries. So, but it's a topic that is very difficult to research as an ethnographer. Mm-hmm. How you go there and you ask questions. So I started to pay attention to the stories about paramilitaries using sorcery, using brujeria, when I was living in Villavicencio for a while as well. They were very, very popular, these stories, so I thought, I kind of married the two things. Mm-hmm. I thought it was an interesting point of view to understand paramilitarism more than, as armed actors causing violence, but as, as cultural agents. So that's why it's not very interesting.
It is absolutely fascinating. I've spent a fair amount of time in Guaviare, around San Jose. and a little bit outside. I've also been to, up in Meta, where Meta meets Caquetá, San Juan de Losada, right there on the river. And I am now thinking of exactly the billar there in the center of town only played música norteña, only played the sort of the Mexican música norteña. And so now I'm fascinated, and I think we just need to do a sidebar here, is how, I mean, we know, most people who listen to this podcast will know about the paramilitary groups, the I would say right-wing militarized groups. I don't know really, I have to be very careful how I phrase this, but that sort of landowners started, and then they got funding through different entities, and then they moved into their own kidnapping and drug trade, and then have become, through the 80s and the 90s, probably I think actually very well proven, the sort of group that committed the most atrocities in Colombia's conflict. And then there was the sort of in inverted commas demobilization during the government of Álvaro Uribe. That was the demobilization of the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia. But of course, this just provided an opportunity for splinters, and then you've got the Clan del Golfo now, and who are the Urabeños, who are the Gaitanistas, and then there's the Pelaos, and there's the Pelusos, and the whatever else. And so I am
many
curious,
heads.
Yes, I'm curious though, at the end of this, is how, if you could give us very brief background in how paramilitarism changed like the fashion and changed, because that's just fascinating. I mean, I don't really, I've got to get my head around it.
Okay, so, I didn't study this at the end properly because I got into the Bujeria stuff. Okay. But the things that I observed in San Jose, if you know this town, San Jose is this town that is kind of on the corner with the forest ends and the flatlines begin, and San Jose and all these communities there have this river culture. They are communities built around this the ecology of the river and the ecology of the raining and rain season. So what I could see is that these paramilitaries arrived with the ethos of cattle ranching. They are very, how you say this, all these wearing hats, very llanero outfits, wearing hats, wearing boots, certain marks of brands of watches, necklace, rings, golden rings, big motorbikes. You can see these things in very other rural areas of Colombia as well. But you could see that in the moment I was there in 2006, 2007, 2008, because I was doing different projects. They were, they were ruling town. That was their kingdom, basically. So you could see this in these bars, in the billares, these gangs of paramilitaries hanging outside, and they all were wearing kind of the same things. And they were playing this norteña music. And you will hear also people, like old people in particular. I love to talk to old people. You hear the stories, like how it used to be different before them. And one thing I would say that is that, like societies change, and there is some nostalgic outcry of old people in everywhere all the time. Like we were talking about how much London has changed and all of that. But it's interesting to hear how they point out paramilitaries as the factor of change. And it's definitely, it's a very interesting topic to research,
As I was there the first time in 2007, and I recall meeting people. I was doing stories on the Nukak Maku, obviously the nomadic tribe who are, in almost, I would say, displacement camps on the outskirts of town. and I did some of the Guayabero people as well.
Yeah, I was working with them.
Oh yeah, well, I
Yeah,
went one
maybe
afternoon.
we met.
If possible, it's a long time ago. I was trying to find also the guy who was translating the Bible or the New Testament into their language, which I found quite fascinating. It was a kind of a bit like at play in the fields of the Lord. But that said, I did recognize these groups outside the Biares, and I did meet some people working for NGOs and said, you know, they already know you're here. They know
exactly.
you're doing the story, and you know you are being watched. And I was like, I can tell, because there is this undercurrent of aggression that's there. But you got out. you could and I do love the fact that you're doing ethnography, because it does mean talking to people, and talking to the old people is wonderful, because they also have a way of speaking, don't they? You know, and so let's bring this to our Brujeria, because are they the people that then introduced you to the sorcery going on? Because when everybody who listens to this knows I spend most of my time in Monpós or Bogota, and my in-laws will talk about brujas all the time, and they will talk about something being, done by a witch, or the suspicion that someone's done something through a witch, some black magic. And I was thinking of two phrases that they say a lot. Te puedo contar algo, pero que las brujas no nos escuche. It's one thing that my suegro says, and that's a way of blocking. Apparently you say that and the bruja can't listen. And the other one was yo no creo en las brujas, pero de que las hay, las hay.
Yes.
Is the other one.
Yes.
So tell us, just plunge into the witchcraft and say how. So you recognize the sort of the nature people with the river and this connection to the earth, I think.
Like I definitely agree. Like brujeria is omnipresent in every single aspect of life. And I have a very hard time at the beginning of my PhD trying, because when they say like you have to define what brujeria is, it's like I don't know. So because you have these different practices, like brujeria is very relational. So for some people, brujeria will be doing some healing. For example, for some Pentecostal pastors, even doing meditation is brujeria. And also because you can use brujeria for every situation that you encounter in life. So, more than one magical tradition, more than Santeria, Spiritism, white or red magic, all these kind of little traditions. I think that brujeria is a way of thinking about these magical powers intervening in every aspect of life. That's how it is, and that's how it's so omnipresent in people's life. I also, in Cali, we have, these Afro communities, this influence of Afro Colombian people. So we have a lot of brujeria talk all the time. And I didn't hear the first saying that you said. Like I never heard that. That was the first time I heard that.
There you go.
So that must be very Caribbean. I think that also there are these local repertories about brujeria that are fed by these different type of communities that have these different practices. Although brujeria is very eclectic. But the second saying, yo no creo en brujas, pero que las hay, definitely. I couldn't translate that into English properly. No. How did you translate that?
Well, I'm saying I don't believe in witches, but whatever there are, there are. I don't know. It's not really very good, is it?
Es el de que las is very hard to translate. But I will say something about that saying. That it was my first, reflections about the topic, is that there is always some ambiguity regarding if people believe or not in brujeria. Even if people talk about it, or, even when they practice, they always have this little pocket of skepticism with them. People express doubts. We went to sorceries, which I talked to 4 sorcerers during the field.
Yeah.
1 male, 3 females. And they were also, there was this lady who, she's very famous in Villavicencio, and she's very old as well. She gave me a couple of interviews, very, very, like suspicious of people. And she will tell me that she hears there is a new witch in town. She goes there and she passes herself as a client to test her powers. Because she say half of the sorcerers are frauds, are tricksters, are just not real.
So she can recognize, by testing their powers, she can recognize if they're a fraud or if they're real. And did she say she finds frauds?
All the time.
All the time.
And you hear these stories about like people who are really into it, even those people, they express these doubts. And that's why I cannot, when people ask me, but you believe in these things? Particularly British people in academic environments. Yeah. It's like, well, I don't know. It's kind of, what is to believe? What does it mean to believe? Let's start there. That's the question.
It's curious, isn't it? Because it's not as if it's something, I don't think obviously it's not, because I've visited Santeros in Cuba, I've visited brujas in the jungle in Ecuador, I visited, a candomblé ceremony in Bahia, in Brazil. I'm sure I've seen some stuff in Guyana. It's pretty widespread in the region, but then also in England, the Wiccans and those that go down, the Druids, aren't they just sorcerers as well? Aren't they? This is something that exists quite strongly and profoundly in the English, British isles, and so when you read all about the Celts and the Gaelic people and so on. So I think, I don't know, maybe it's academic circles, but I want to know that,
maybe.
Maybe. So, but you went and said, I'm going to focus on the llanos, so the sort of the eastern plains.
May I ask, what were you doing interviewing Santeros in Cuba?
I wasn't. I was actually just visiting. I'm totally curious. It's not as if I don't know if I believe or if I don't believe, but there's something that's happened to me over time, is that I've been very skeptical most of my life. I think being brought up as in a very Protestant background, I had to go to church a lot, and therefore that I rejected it. I rejected that general sort of religious upbringing. And so therefore I think I ended up just exploring other things. And then when I became a journalist, I just wanted to bring in other interests. And then I worked in the jungle in Ecuador for a bit. And someone said, "Oh, do you want to meet the shaman?" I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And that kind of thing. And so each time I'm in a place, if something pops up that's quite curious, then I'll just sort of go along. And they're all different, but there's all similar traits. But what I feel at the end of this, what I'm getting to, is that, from my time in Montport, so I've now been spending time there since 2007, my mother-in-law and my father-in-law genuinely believe. And my father-in-law is from a town on the Magdalena River called Gamarra in Cesar. And Gamarra is known for having the most amount of black magic witches, I think, in Colombia. So he grew up thinking that. So one of his nieces, so one of my wife's cousins, she will readily say to me, "Oh yeah, well, I live next door to a bruja." And she'd tell me about things that happened in my house. And so therefore I can't deny or reject their beliefs. And I think that's where I come from. It's like, I may not believe, but I must understand that people are truly affected by this. And then one other story is that, staying in my house in Montport, one night we heard something outside. And of course, I was sent outside because it was my wife and my children and I in the room, no one else in the house. And it was a vulture going down the hallway. It was
Jesus.
Yeah, I know, and they stink as well. but it couldn't. And so I had to chase this vulture out. And after a lot of flailing around, this is midnight, and I threw the doors open and I almost got it out. And it was at the moment a police truck went past, and they were watching an English guy in his pajamas chasing a vulture around his house. I mean, but
what a sight.
When I said this, and then I said this to someone in Montpos who is said to be a witch, but we get on very well.
A good witch.
Well, I don't know. I mean, once I was talking to her and someone came walking behind me, shaking their finger at me, saying, don't talk to her. And I'm like, well, I treat everyone the same. But anyway, she said, that's not good. Witches take the form of vultures when they want to come into your house. That's what they told me. So I don't know. Did you hear that? But I want to get back to your llanos. But the llanos is full of witches, as far as I know.
Yes. It definitely, I mean, you have these sort of imaginaries about places. And now you mentioned this little town that is like most witches in Colombia. I think Tolima has one town like that, Urabá as well, the Chocó as well.
I'm sure.
So, yes. So there is always these imaginaries about these places being the most ridden by witches, but all Colombia is ridden by witches. Okay. And the llanos in particular have this reputation. And since I'm little, I heard that many, all the stories about Bujeria, half of them came from the llano, all these espantos, La Pata Sola, La Madre Monte, all of these came from the llano. And the more I read about the llano, the more I find out that this came from a long time. This came from colonial history as well. The llanos was isolated, as many other Colombian frontiers as well, but they were particularly special because it's 1/5 of the Colombian territory. It's a big, big area to be isolated for so long, basically until like after the violence. It just after the 60s started becoming like, integrated into the Colombian nation state.
The colonization, the expanse, the migrations into the area. But so
and link it with the economy. So like this kind of very far away remote areas, like the llanos for so long, I think that is associated with this sort of land of magical happenings, the land of the legend.
You head down there, and what do? Knock on their doors and say, listen, I'm doing my PhD, I'm fascinated. How does it, because this is going to take time.
Yes, of course. That's why when you do your PhD, you in anthropology, you have 1 year to do your PhD. I ended up taking 2 months more because precisely my topic was very difficult. So I didn't know if I was going to be able to research my topic, to be honest. So because precisely you kind of, even you ask even more complicated. Imagine me asking paramilitaries, hey, so you guys, do you use brujeria? No, not possible, right?
But I guess those guys aren't going to give you that much information, but the brujas probably did, right? They said, well, we do have a lot of, we do have a lot of paramilitary clients, because they are clients, because you pay, right?
Yeah, they are clients. They are also friends. But well, this is the thing. I started my PhD. I have plan A, plan B. Plan A was studying this brujeria that is used particularly by these people, paramilitary groups in this context, because I already knew the stories. And the plan B was to study brujeria in general.
Too big.
Because I didn't know how complicated it was going to be. So I went there with a family, to live with a family, this, related, it's a friend's family. I went to live in a little town, stay with them, incredibly generous, open, and amazing people who open their doors in their house. And I ended up from there building up my networks, in the neighborhood, in town. And this is one of these towns in which paramilitaries still rule. They are not hanging out there with their guns, because like in 2000s when they were completely visible, shameless, but they know who get in and who get out. They know who you are and all of that. So I used this indirect questioning approach So I will ask about Brujeria in general. And I will see when the stories came out, if they came out at the end, of course, how prominent they are, how people talk about them, what are the effects that it has on people. And in these networks of people, I met combatants and ex-combatants, demobilized people, and I met the sorcerers, because it's a small town, so everyone at the end knows everyone.
And they know you're asking.
Yes, yeah. They knew what I was asking, and after a while, when I was safe enough, I started asking about the concrete practices they used. Okay. But yeah, you know what, this thing about the vulture and all this.
Yeah.
This how you say this? It's like a mysticism.
Yeah.
It's like life is embedded. Like before I came to the field, one of the reasons why the family took me in was because the lady told me a week after I arrived that this beetle came fly into the room where I was going to stay and stayed there a whole night. And she knew that a good visit was going to come. And so she opened the doors for me when I asked, hey, can I stay here for a while while I get my place? But yeah.
It was a beetle. So, we have in the coast, if it's a butterfly flies in and lands on the wall, then you're going to have good visits.
Oh, okay.
So there you go. Yeah, we've got a lot. But this is, as you say, a sort of mysticism, but it's fascinating. But I mean, why, I have to ask this, why do we, why or can we connect this brujeria with paramilitaries? I mean, why were they, because it's much more than like the guerrilla, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you tell me.
Well, yes, there are all these practices that I call occult aggression in my thesis, that are precisely when someone sends you intent to cause misfortune, you know, to you or hurt you, your family, your business. But the brujeria that paramilitaries were using was this difference. So I identify two practices because they use, you know, in their personal life they use everything, but for the activities of the group, there were some practices associated with creating these bulletproof shields. It's called the Crusados, and these rituals entail to mix this person's body with a spirit. Yeah. You know, so the spirits would create this spiritual entity would create this chill. And they will gain this supernatural strength in combat, and they will become so brave and, you know, so daring. So this was the stories I was researching, but I came out talking about that with people because the stories are very similar and are very simple. They're like basically, oh, I saw this guy wearing this amulet and he was all covered in bruises because the bullets just bounce on their skin. And that's it. That's the story. That's the story that people tell. Paramilitaries tell another stories about them. Yeah. But there were other kinds of stories. There were the stories about these people who make a pact with the devil. Yeah. So they were not only bulletproof, but they were also, they have money, and they were very cruel. They would kill randomly. People have a lot of stories associated with that. They kill the neighbor in this way, or, you know, atrocious crimes. They are related with atrocious crimes, and they have all these sort of weird little powers. Like, for example, there's a very famous story about paramilitary called Pollo Roger. He's been quoted in very testimonies in peace and justice sentences and stuff I have to read for my thesis, and not only stories in town. And people were so scared of this guy. And people tell stories like, so he used to grab a snake, and he will look at the snake in the eye and will make it sleep. And that's that's the story. And so you have these powers in battle, but also they have this very quirky, or I don't know, useless powers. Why do you need to put a snake to sleep? And that those little powers was the ones causing the most terror, you know. There was other person who's called the Chavo. It has a Mexican.
Yeah.
You know, all these paramilitaries have nicknames. So his power, but it was, you know, he was strong and, you know, like Rambo like kind of guy, but at the same time he will walk under the rain without getting wet.
It's not the
He will
best
hang his
power, is
hammock in what exactly. So what do you make out of I mean, how do you interpret these practices?
Yeah.
Is I have to say, I've tried. It's not easy. They are irreducible sometimes.
Yeah. I've heard the one about being sort of bulletproof. But how? I mean, one of the times it was sort of like bathing in well, I think it was vulture blood or cat blood or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
What was it? Cat blood.
Yeah.
And also I've heard also that sometimes people eat vulture to get rid of cancer. I that's what another thing I've heard. I don't know. I mean, you hear these stories, and I never know, because I think with the vulture one, my stomach was turning so much because they just stink. And about dipping the bullet in blood as well. Isn't there something?
Yes, that's and this is the thing that I find out. My thesis, I'm focusing only in the practice to get bulletproof men, because it's very extended, you know, all the other practices. And but I think that all these little stories that one hears around, it has an effect. Like it has that, like I could see you're puzzled. You want to know more, you want to hear more stories, you want to connect the dots, you want to interpret. It lures you to this reality where you have to just ponder in what's true, why people do this. It's like it's an interpretative work these Brujeria practices kind of create in people, in the environment. And it's kind of fun, you have to admit, engaging in this conversation, in this collective speculation about what's real, what's not. Why is this happening? So when I focus in this practice and I isolated a little bit of, you know, like I just look at the practice and what effect has in people, and how you know, people experience that, because I also talk about the rituals that the people went through, and people who were Crusader as well. So you start to see that you find very similar practices in other parts of Colombia. For example, you have the thing about dipping the bullets in the coating it in blood. Sometimes some pastors said that this is also children's bloods were used, on human sacrifices were used in the plains. Yeah, it's very very dark stories, but it gets to a point when there is not possible to find one pattern. So you have to look at one practice and only that practice to be able to see how, in this very concrete instance, this practice acquires meaning for people. How I'm not going to fall, you know, I'm not going to be seduced by Brujeria's game of just continued, you know, endless speculation about things.
It's so let me. I want to talk. Pollo. What was the name? Pollo Rojo.
Pollo Roger.
Roger. Now, Pollo Roger sounds like a chicken eatery, like, you know, sort of Cali or something.
You know what was called Pollo? Because he was 13 when he was recruited, and he was the deadliest paramilitaries when he was like 18. That's why he was Pollo.
He can sleep a snake. I guess you could say that he's dominating nature, and also something that's, you know, deadly dangerous. That would instill fear, sleeping snakes, catching snakes, and so on. But tell us, I mean, so the bulletproof, this is the bulletproofing is your key investigation, this La Cruces. And so that is bathing in cat's blood. That's the one you found, or are there other ways?
I think I separated these bulletproof men from the others that had other kind of powers, especially particularly also the power to seduce women and the power to yield money.
That's what all Colombian men think they have. Let's be honest.
Yes, love magic, all these kind of practices are like very, very popular everywhere. So, do you know these people who have other kind of powers? They were very associated with the devil, with sacrifice, with the idea of making a pact involving blood. So I separate them because the ritual to be bulletproof sometimes, most of the time, is regarded as white magic. Like just creating this very good luck in yourself. Even if you're creating this luck, but agreeing with a spirit to protect you, taking in a spirit is like a voluntary possession, basically. But in many instances, but for the sorcerers, for people, and for excombatants themselves, this being cruzado is not black magic. It's kind of in a very gray zone. Whereas all the other powers and everything that involves blood and pacts are dark magic, the worst kind of magic that you can use.
And
so there is this
is designed to harm people. I mean, that's just the clarity to harm people.
Yes, but at the same time, when you're doing this you're acquiring these great powers. Like back in the day, the pact with the devil story. What is the pact with the devil? You surrender your humanity. You give yourself to the devil. So you're harming yourself. It's an aggression of yourself, I guess. That's you could say that. And there are many stories about these paramilitaries making a pact with the devil, which again has regional variations. So, for example, in the plains, the story with the black cat, and there is a book that is called San Cipriano's book. It was very popular among paramilitaries, and it was very popular in the middle and higher ranks. It was not as popular for combatants, because making a pact with the devil is a big deal, isn't it? There is no way out when you make a pact with the devil. Basically, you never return. So people who were very into their paramilitary life, 5-6 years into it, who were climbing positions, they were willing to make this commitment to protect themselves and to escalate more.
But again, why the paramilitaries? Why did they particularly, or so many of them, veer towards Brujeria?
I think that in every, like we say, Brujeria is everywhere. Everywhere. You could find it also in guerrilla groups, but it takes different forms. That's what I'm claiming. And I'm not saying that there are no cruzado people in guerrilla groups or even in the military, Yeah. But these practices became prominent in certain places and certain moments. And so my investigation goes to ask why so many combatants needed this. What does it mean for this region that this was happening? Why people are telling these stories so much? They were so popular, and I didn't know when I started. I thought because this was the place where I heard the stories, I go there, no? So, but the more I read and the more I investigated, I found out that Urabá and the plains are the two regions where these stories come from. And you can look in the press. You can look in the Peace and Justice Sentences testimonies, Centro de Memoria Histórica reports. You can talk to the mobilized people, and they will talk about cruzados from the plains or from the Urabá. And it's very interesting. Even there was this TV show called the Los Tres Caínes.
The Three Canes, yes.
Sí.
It was a soap opera, right?
Yeah, it was like a series of opera thingy.
I never watched it, so yeah.
I watch a lot of narco novellas. I think they're very useful for researching this.
It's research, yes.
Yeah, no enjoyment. But this is a portrait of paramilitaries, the life of Carlos Castaño and his brothers, the founders of the AUC. When they go to the plains, the AUC goes to the plains, it happens halfway through the series. They go there to fight a paramilitary group that is called the Buitragos. They were the local paramilitary groups, and they wanted the AUC to merge with the plains structures. But the Buitragos were too proud and say, no, this is my business. And then they engage in open war. This is widely documented. But in the TV series, these practices were so popular that they introduced Brujeria only when they go to the plains to fight, to meet with this paramilitary drug lord. So it's strongly associated with the plains, and I'm trying to interpret this in my thesis. I have a theoretical bet on it, but still puzzles me.
Well, I think it's a better thesis at the end if you are still asking questions, because it allows not only yourself but others to take up the mantle, because sometimes you're just like, I can't go any further. But tell me one thing about because I mean, we could talk for hours, I think, but about your research. When you talk to ex-combatants, how do they feel about having, let's say, participated in pacts with the devil and so on? Is there regret?
I didn't meet anyone with a pact with the devil.
Okay.
Because they are all dead or they continue to be active paramilitaries.
Okay.
It seems that the pact with the devil is when you are too far gone, even to demobilize you don't come back. Whereas the ones that subjected to bulletproof chills and this Crusader Brujeria, there are feelings of shame. It's very shameful to participate from the rituals, to have been Crusaders. Actually, it was so difficult to talk about it that they were more comfortable talking about all the awful things that paramilitaries did in the region. Limpiezas and selective killings, and they were more comfortable talking about these things than actually talking about the rituals. It took me a while, and many of them would all talk about seeing other people going through the rituals, but never themselves. So it took me a while to find two people who actually say, yes, I did this. I went through this. So, and I guess that comes from the fact that, like, for example, in the story you tell about the vulture in your house and people saying this could be bruja who is like doing something to you. Brujeria is something that the victim of brujeria, it's a story that the victim of brujeria claims. I was victim, and that triggers some reactions. You protect yourself. You try to find out who did this, why did they this. If you have to, go through cleansings, or subject yourself to other rituals to get rid of this curse. So it changes your behavior. It activates something, and then you will tell the story about how you were victim of brujeria and how you no longer like vultures or something like that. It just changed something. It becomes part of your personal and familiar life or something.
Yeah.
But the person who does brujeria is never part of the story. Who actually I know they exist because the sorcerers work for them, and they make a living wage out of these practices. There are people who have these feelings and go there and say, like, I want this person out of my life, or I want this man for myself and nobody else, or I want revenge. And so the person who actually asks or triggers the events is like a ghost. It's like you don't know who, they're hidden from the story. So when you've heard Crusader stories, they are the ones who did that to themselves. So they have this stigma of very socially sanctioned practice, but they are openly exposing themselves. In their time, like Crusaders were use amulets, and they would paint their nails in black. So you're publicly saying, yes, I did brujeria on myself. And that comes with a price that many people who demobilize afterwards is paying with a lot of shameful feelings. More than guilt, actually, it's very strange.
There's a lot mixed up in there. I think we're going to have to leave it for another day because there's so much. Or I'm just
to be continued.
Yeah, when your thesis comes out, and then the book, of course, you'll share the links with us so we can read it. But so I have a final kind of question here. Well, I've got a couple. I heard down the grapevine, and it's something that your friends have said, that you've had a spell put on you by one of the witches. And then before you respond to that, the second thing is, you spent so long investigating and researching. I'm curious, if you're walking down the street or so on, can you recognize someone who may be a witch or a sorcerer?
No.
Okay, good.
Good. No. But you could, they have, I have certain sensibility when people talk about these things. Like the true sorcerer, they are not very vocal about it. They are very, how you say that, cautious. The tricksters or the more healers, curandero type of people, they are very willing to talk, and they will tell you they will have this power and this other power. And they are the ones who, you just have to keep an eye on it. Maybe it's just people who want attention. But yeah, couldn't tell.
Okay, and the spell on you, tell us about this one.
The spell of me, well, it happens twice, actually.
Oh, no way.
Yes. Well, this is, even if I was not researching Bujeria, this is what happens when you go to a little town as a woman, young, and you start, just to hang out with people. But the first one was related with the fact that someone started to tell me that I have to be careful because someone could tie me, like a bind me, the love spell. It's called, how you say, the chundul. Have you heard about chundul?
Yes, I have, but I can't think of it right now.
It's like a perfume.
Okay.
It's like a perfume, in the Guaviare it's very popular as well because it's a very indigenous, it's a plant, basically. Okay. They do this liquid, and they put it on the cells, and then you're bewitched by the person.
You're irresistible, or you become, okay.
Yeah, it's like a love spell, exactly.
Okay.
But it has like you have to recite a spell. It has like a whole preparation. But people were telling me that this particular person was doing brujeria to me, was trying to tie me up because I was spending too much time with them, and I just found this person very fascinating.
Okay.
Very knowledgeable. So it activates speculation. So you really get to a point in which you ask, is this happening? But I mean, should I ask someone to, and I did, I consulted. That's the next step. You have suspicions, you have a scapegoat, and then you consult with someone. And this person told me, no, you're fine.
Okay.
You're clean.
There you go. So, and then,
yeah, but it was like 2 months ruminating about it.
And then the second one?
The second one, it was because I have many problems writing out my dissertation.
You are not alone. That's every academic.
Yeah, it's the PhD curse, basically. But in Colombia, in the context we are, people will say to me, many people, actually, some of the sorcerers told me, you talk about your work too much, and people feel envy of you being successful on, having the privilege to have higher education in this context. And I think that someone is doing this to you, someone is doing something to you, someone is tying you up. And then activates speculation. So I'm still in the speculation phase. Because it's just been very series of unlucky events. It's not only thesis.
Yeah.
But that's the effect it has. It has to pass. I could set things in motion and go to cleansings and all do these things. I'm just trying to forget about it. I would never get to the bottom of the situation, to the actual truth of the situation. But it's definitely a doubt that is planted there. It's something, and it has to do. I mean, if I'm going to analyze it on my own terms, I do it to myself. What I'm doing in the thesis, it has to do also for this. I introduce inequality in a social situation. I come from this, I'm in this privileged position in this social context. So other people will assume that other people will be envious of that. It says this envy is so ubiquitous, It's like people assume that other person has envy, but they say like, yeah, I feel envy, and then therefore I did this. So yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not very interesting. Once you start studying these things, like it takes the fun out sometimes of the topic.
Well, I like to think that we've drawn away a bit from academia, and maybe this is a little bit of a catharsis for you to talk about it in a more conversational manner and not so heavy.
Definitely, yeah.
I am not a brujo that I know of, so I can't lift the spell. I can't help
Oh,
you.
thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I can't do anything. Although I was referred to actually as a brujo in Caquetá, not far from Chiribiquete. So they said, so I don't think so though. But the seed of doubt was planted. As you say.
What did they say?
Well, what I was told to stop taking photographs by one local person from the Huitoto family. And I said to someone else who was showing us round, another person from a different Huitoto family, and they said, no, he's a bad person. He's the leader of that family. And then that afternoon, he was then ejected as the leader of his sort of area, and everyone went, it was you. It was you. They pointed at me for doing it. So there you go.
Oh, Jesus.
I hadn't remembered that story in a long time. You made me remember that now. Perhaps I should not reflect on this too much, but
did you can I have a final question? Did you do something about the vulture?
Well, we had to clean the walls because it stank, because it kept flying into the walls, because it had an injured foot. And then we got a plant called mata raton.
Yeah.
I don't know what the translation is. And we had to wash, because it went into one room because the doors were open, and that's where it got trapped. And apparently it was looking for someone in that room. So the person that normally sleeps in that room, who's actually normally my brother-in-law, so there you go. And so we had to wash down the floors and walls with mata raton. There you go.
Okay, yeah, you did a cleansing.
Yeah, I didn't
for the house.
Yeah, but that's what people said. That's what my family said we needed to do. And so, I mean, who am I to say no?
Along.
Yeah, who am I to say
no? And it doesn't do any harm.
No, exactly. That's what I figured. But listen, thank you for sharing all of this. It's really amazing, and I'm looking forward to reading articles written by you and this thesis, because I definitely will.
I'm looking forward to publish. I really want to share this information with people in the world so people can comment. I'm really looking forward.
It's fascinating.
Thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to talk about the thesis and all these circumstances, also because it's a topic that it becomes very personal at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And it will be in English, so I'll be able to devour it. so there you go. Because sometimes academia in Spanish is just a bit much for me. But listen, thank you so much, Johanna Gomez. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing what really is a quite fascinating subject of study. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
I wish you all the best. So anyway, we'll sign off. We've been talking to Johanna Gomez, who's an anthropologist from the Universidad Nacional in Bogotá, got an MA at Goldsmiths in London, and she's currently writing her PhD thesis at UCL. So we'll be back next week with more interesting stories about Colombia, but I think you'll agree that this was really quite astounding. But I've been Richard McColl, and this has been Colombia Calling this week, episode 402. Be sure to tune in next week. Thank you again, and bye-bye.